Let me start by saying thanking Louis, Isaac, and all for this invitation. I know I'm supposed to talk about Vision 2030, but I hope Isaac could not mind my doing this. But the reason that I'm here actually is just to tell you how excited I am that, one, this conference is taking place, and two, that Isaac Rutenberg has something to do with it. And after having to do that, I might as well sit down right now, because you have no idea what it means to this country. Isaac is a personal friend from long before he came to Strathmore. I met him a while back in California, where my wife was studying in California, and he was studying in California. And listening to him over the years, I kept wondering, how are we ever going to get this kind of expertise, this kind of experience in this country, in Kenya? Because under Vision 2030, our aim is to transform this country from a third world country to a country that is innovative, that is industrializing, that is upper middle income. And to do this, one has to do a lot more than merely build roads or railway stations or airports. There's a lot more that has to be done. I recall when I was very, very young, in the 1980s, there was a set of vehicles that were imported into this country by some famous politician of the time. That's how things used to be done then. And these vehicles were called ponies. I don't know how many of you have ever heard of ponies, and I think only about maybe 2 or 3 people in this room probably would have been old enough to even remember that. They came from South Korea. And I'm addressing myself to the young people in this room especially. They came from South Korea. And they were instantly poo-pooed as rubbish vehicles. You know, and nobody worth anything would be seen or would be caught alive or dead driving one of those cars. The cars of the day were Japanese cars. But those cars, those ponies, belonged to South Korea, and they were Hyundai cars. Today, across the world, even in Japan itself, in the US, Hyundais are cars that are doing extremely well. And the same could be said about Toyotas themselves. Japanese cars in the 70s in the US, nobody in the US would buy Japanese cars before the 1970s. But by the time the 80s, 90s came along, there were the cars to go to. Now, what's the point I'm trying to make? Is that many of the countries that we look to as role models for Kenya under Vision 2030 in terms of having industrialized and transformed themselves, lifted themselves from poverty, from third world, into middle income countries, into increasingly developed countries, industrializing countries. Yes, they build skyscrapers, they build highways and roads and airports and ports. I mean, Incheon in South Korea is, I don't know how many of you have heard of Incheon in South Korea, #1 airport in the world today. But more than that, what they did was to develop the capacity to innovate and invent locally, homegrown, made in Korea. They turned made in Korea into something that they could sell globally. And I'm a strong view that we are doing quite a bit under Vision 2030. And by the way, I jumped straight into it because I'm assuming that by now, people sitting in Strathmore at an IP conference know what Vision 2030 is. I don't have to talk about the economic pillar, the social pillar, the political pillar, and the foundations ad nauseum. We've done this over and over. If you don't know what it is about, vision2030.go.ke website. Go there. Right? I only have 10 minutes. I was told, and 10 minutes of Q&A, right? And I think it's important that we focus on what I think is a real issue. So, yes, we have economic pillar projects. We must industrialize. We must have a value addition in agriculture. We must have high-level trade, IT. We need to develop a better quality and better access to healthcare and education in a social pillar. But I think what is critically important is to find ways to be able to do these things for ourselves. I have just come from an event where we are trying to computerize Kenyatta National Hospital. You know, Kenyatta National Hospital is one of the 2 referral hospitals in the country, and is actually the main one. And in order to be able, not just computerize it, but to have the right systems in place so that it is a hub of efficiency in this country, we have Accenture from the US developing the system for us. Yesterday, we had a major announcement. IBM is setting up a research lab, the first research lab of its kind in Africa, in Nairobi. And that is good. But when shall we be able to say that we can do all these things for ourselves? And while it looks like it's very far away, it was in the 1970s for Korea, but look at where they are today. We have to start somewhere. And this is for me where IP comes in, setting up the right legal frameworks and regulations in order to have the right IP protection environment that incentivizes innovations, because we have innovators amongst you, and great ones too. I think we have innovators here who can be able to innovate, serve and provide products and services that will be global, that you can sell anywhere in the world. You can sell them in France, in the UK. But we need the right IP environment. Those of you who watched the closing ceremony on Sunday of the London Olympics, and then also watched the handing over to Rio, and those of you who might have heard that Kenya has made a claim that we want to host the 2024 Olympics, you have to try. My personal view is that we actually can host the 2028 Olympics. 16 years, not 12. And the reason for it is we have to be able to do what you saw happening in London. To do that, we must have our own homegrown capacity and abilities. And we shall never develop those homegrown capacities and abilities if we do not have our own original innovations as part of the process. And to do that, IP is critically important. Now, I'm not an expert in IP, which is why, as I said, I'm very excited that this conference is taking place. I had hoped to catch Isaac's presentation, but I think I'll catch it later still. But I think having what Strathmore is doing here, what the law school here is doing, is excellent. I think this is critical to Vision 2030. So I congratulate you for having set this up. Those of you who are in this room, I'm glad you're here. I hope that you will stay throughout the entire conference, listen to all the presentations, ask all the questions, and that out of this conference, we shall begin to see actual significant change in this country. I think all of you are familiar that over the last 20 years, we've seen all sorts of things. We've talked about and beaten ourselves up about young innovators doing all sorts of things, and then you don't hear about them. 6 months, 1 year down the road, you wonder what happened to that whiz kid who came up with a plane, or who came up with, a mobile phone heating up, cooking his tea while he's in a matatu. All that kind of stuff. We need to move to a level of sustainability where we actually have a true industry of innovation in different sectors, and where we actually have made in Kenya as a brand that is credible, that is global, and that is sellable. And it starts with step number 1. For me, this is step number one. I'm sure a lot of work has been done, obviously, to prepare for this conference. But there's a lot more to do. But now that we're here, I think the journey has started. And my message today is very simple, that for Vision 2030, all the things that we wanted to do, or that we need and require to do, the right IP framework, environment, the right legislation and policy framework, skills in that industry, and obviously, ultimately, the comfort of our innovators, that their intellectual property will be protected. And, sorry, not to go on, but protected in a manner and fashion that you can actually innovate. Not merely protected for the sake of protecting it and then you lock it up and we never hear about you and nobody else can take advantage of your ideas. No, we don't want that. We want the right balance, right? So thank you very much for inviting me here today. And I think it's better, rather than take you down through projects of Vision 2030, which I don't think is the idea today, I'll take any questions with regard to this subject and Vision 2030. Thank you very much.